Hello and welcome to Recon Paint Gaming. I'm Patrick. Today we are going to be talking about obstacles. To be more specific, we're going to be talking about asteroids, debris clouds, and gas clouds. I understand that there are other obstacles that are out there, such as the blaze and spare canister parts, and also your electric chafe cloud, but we're strictly going to talk about the generic or standard obstacles that you get in your packs that you get to place during the game setup, because we have had a lot of requests to do a video such as this. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, to start, we're going to show you some examples of what all of these obstacles look like. These are going to be your asteroids here. Some can be purple, some can be, medium sized, some can be incredibly small. The big thing you'll notice is most of them have large asteroids or solid rocks on them. So basically they're huge, they're chunky, and if your ship flies into them, it's going to do a lot of damage. Next up is debris clouds. You'll notice that they're shaped very differently because it's a lot of floating debris, a lot of different points and random areas just protruding from itself. This is to display, like wrecked ships or just floating debris and other chunks of space that can, clog up your ship, cause you to stress or freak out, and they have different abilities or different triggers that happen with them. And then finally, gas clouds. More bubbly, very different shapes from your asteroids and your debris, but basically they're usually red. They look like fumes or gas, and same as these, as the other two, they have completely different triggers and abilities that they do, and your ship can interact with them or even cancel different abilities, which we'll go over later. All right, so now we're going to go over what these things actually do, how you interact with them, and what happens if you even crash into them. If you have any questions on how to set up the asteroids for play, go ahead and check out How to Play X-Wing video right there in the corner. It's going to tell you where to set them up, how far apart they have to be from each other, and so on and so forth. So, you're playing your first game of X-Wing, you're playing with asteroids, you accidentally either fly through one of them or your ship lands on top of one of them. We're going to go over each little step that's going to happen and what happens when you run over these things. Okay, so we're going to cover overlapping first, or what happens if you fly through an obstacle. In this instance, it's time for Ahsoka Tano to move. The Hawk has already moved as well. It's time to execute a maneuver. But, as you can see, Ahsoka has executed 3 straight, ends up on the other side of the obstacle, and completes the maneuver. So in this instance, Ahsoka is flying through the obstacle and not overlapping it. So that's going to trigger certain rules and effects, and we're now going to go over which effect happens with which obstacle. Okay, first obstacle we're going to talk about is the asteroid. If you don't know anything about it, it does come in your standard core sets. It's the first obstacle that you're going to be introduced to for the game. When you overlap an asteroid, the ship suffers 1 damage. So immediately you take either 1 shield and flip it face over. If you don't have any shields remaining, you put a face down damage card next to that ship. Next, you roll 1 die. On a hit or a crit result, the ship suffers 1 damage. So again, if you have still shield tokens active, you flip another one face down, or if you have no shield tokens left, you put another face down damage. Next up is the debris cloud, which looks like this. When you overlap it or fly through a debris cloud, the ship is assigned 1 stress token immediately. Roll 1 attack die. On a hit result, the ship suffers 1 hit damage, so just 1 shield or 1 face down. On a crit result, however, the ship suffers 1 crit damage. So again, either 1 shield or a face-up damage card. And then you're also stressed, so you execute your maneuver and you're assigned 1 stress. Last is the gas cloud, and this one is the craziest and I think my favorite, which looks like these. The gas cloud. The ship breaks all of its locks and all locks on it. So if you have locked someone, that comes off, and if everyone has you locked, those are also broken. And then you are assigned a drain token. Then roll 1 attack die. On a hit result, get 1 ion token. On a crit result, get 3 ion tokens. So don't think that you're safe even with a large base ship. You could end up with 3 ion tokens just by going through one of them and then end up ionized. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, I want to go over the difference between flying through and overlapping or ending up range 0 of an obstacle, because there is a huge difference when it comes to triggers and fully executing a maneuver, partially executing a maneuver, and so on and so forth. So we're going to reset the previous example. Rather than doing the three forward like before and Ahsoka was flying through the obstacle, she has then chosen the two straight instead and is going to end up overlapping it. So you would execute your maneuver as normal, and then you see yourself overlapping or range zero of an obstacle rather than flying past it. So, as the example we gave, we saw Ahsoka flying through the obstacle. That means your starting position and your ending position means that only the template went through the obstacle. And when you ended your movement, the ship's base did not land anywhere on or, range zero of that obstacle. So, anything that says that you are overlapping or range zero of an obstacle, those effects trigger when your ship base is actually on top of it. The first difference I'm going to point out between flying through an obstacle and overlapping is if you are overlapping an obstacle at the end of your maneuver, you skip your perform action step. Doesn't matter if you're stressed, if you fully executed a maneuver, you skip your perform action step. That doesn't mean you can't perform actions either by different abilities like afterburners or something to where somebody coordinates you an action. It just means when you get to your perform action step, you completely skip it. It doesn't mean you can't still perform actions. The other thing is if you fly through an obstacle, you still get to perform an action. However, if you are then flying through debris cloud, you're going to end up stressed, so you may not be able to perform actions unless you have a ship that still can, even while stressed. Just for example, Tycho in the A-Wing can still perform actions even while stressed, so he would be able to use the ability, but in either case, you're still going to have to suffer the effects of those obstacles, whether you fly through them or overlap them. I also am going to point out another recent change that AMG made, which I 100% agree with. It makes it better for new players and even veteran players, is when you end up overlapping an obstacle and you need to keep flying, obviously, what's going to happen after that? Well, there's going to be many circumstances to where you might still end up stuck on the rock because there's a ship blocking you, or, you're doing an ion maneuver, so you're still going to be stuck on the same rock because you're flying into it again. And even some instances to where somebody shoots you with a tractor beam, barrel rolls you in front of a rock, and then next turn you're going to be flying through it. Okay, here is a prime example of some of the circumstances you're going to run into when it comes to overlapping, obstacles, flying through, range zero, and all that as well. We notice that Ahsoka has chosen to do a 4 straight, but Hawk has blocked her path, and we have to execute this maneuver, and it's going to end just short or bumping into Hawk there. So you'll notice I am now overlapping the asteroid. I didn't fly through it because my template didn't go actually through the obstacle, but I still ended up range zero of it. So that means even though I did bump an enemy ship, I'm not going to get my stress focus because I have overlapped an obstacle or a range zero of it, which means I skip my perform action step. This next example is a very crucial and important one because this is the big change that AMG has made. Luke hasn't activated yet or moved. He is range zero of an obstacle or an asteroid to be more specific. However, the rules state before a ship moves, if it is range zero or at range zero of an obstacle, it does not suffer the effects of that obstacle unless it overlaps it again. So in this case, Luke did a 2 straight, executes his maneuver. He doesn't suffer the effects of that rock. As a matter of fact, Luke can go on to do his action as normal, doesn't have to suffer a damage or roll for more damage as well, since he started range zero of that rock. If an enemy or friendly ship was in his way when he executed that 2 forward, and he ended up bumping and then still being range zero of that rock, then you would suffer the effects by taking a face down or a shield, and then rolling to see if you take more damage. Okay, that basically covers everything from moving to overlapping and different effects that you can suffer from each of these obstacles. We're now going to go into what happens when you're shooting through these, or what is also called as obstructed, which means when you're defending or being shot at, you can draw a line through the opposing target or arc into your ship or vice versa, and the rock or obstacle is in between that line or obstructing it. So it is the start of the engagement phase. Ahsoka is pointed the wrong way at I-5, so she does not get a shot. However, Luke is shooting at Hawk, at range 2, even in the bullseye, so if there are effects, those would trigger. You'll notice that the obstacle is kind of halfway or part way on the side of Hawk, but when you measure for your arc, you use your full base to see the closest point. If the ships are parallel, in this case they may not look it, but let's say that they are. That means the closest point is actually from this side of Luke's arc all the way to this side of Luke's arc. And we can do that by showing you here. So you can see that from this point to here, it does go through the obstacle, but at the rest of this, it doesn't. Now, the shooting player actually gets to decide if he wants to go through the obstacle or where the closest point is if in fact they are parallel or equally distant throughout the entire arc. So once Luke has decided where in fact the closest point is, we line up our shot. We then start building dice. In this case, it is not obstructed, so the Hawk just rolls normal defense and Luke rolls normal attack. For the other example, when Hawk is shooting, let's say it is choosing Ahsoka as the target, we can clearly see the closest point to closest point does go through the obstacle, in which case, while defending, Ahsoka gets an extra defense die, because the shot is obstructed. If Hawk had something to the ability of trick shot, then you would get to add to your attack dice pool because the attack is obstructed. And since this is the only closest point, that is the point in which Hawk has to choose to shoot from. I'm going to show you another example and why it's important to know where to measure from for obstructed shots. I've rotated the Hawk 90 degrees and the arc is now facing forwards. When you're measuring, make sure you're paying attention to where the actual line of the arc is. In this case, it doesn't actually go all the way to the corner of the plastic, it actually ends where the cardboard is. So when measuring from the ship's arc, you go to where the actual arc indicates. From measuring where it actually is going to be closest point, you do measure to the plastic base. So in this case, I measure from the arc to Ahsoka's corner of her base, and the attack is not obstructed. If I measure corner to corner, it is obstructed. So pay attention to where the arc actually ends and where the corner of the ship that is defending begins. Another important thing to note is if you are defending or being shot at by an attack and the line of sight goes through the obstacle, whether you're range 0 of it or not, that is an obstructive shot. If you're range 0 of an obstacle, but a piece of your ship is like sticking out or protruding and the line of fire goes to, let's say, a corner that isn't obstructed by that obstacle, whether you're range 0 of it or not, then that is not obstructed. So you have to really pay attention because, these obstacles are very wavy or sometimes very oddly shaped, and your ship may or may not be obstructed depending on how it's sitting on top of it. There's one more important thing to mention when you are range 0 of an obstacle. When you are range 0 of an asteroid, a debris cloud, or a gas cloud, you are not allowed to attack unless a certain ability allows you to or says that you can while you are range 0 of an obstacle. The other thing is gas clouds. While you are range 0 of a gas cloud, you are not allowed to target lock nor be target locked. Okay, now, of course, my favorite part and everyone else's, some crazy examples that you're going to run into. You're going to be checking the rules reference because you have no idea how it works, or you're going to do something and then later check back and figure out that you did it wrong. Okay, a common question and a first example is Ahsoka again is deciding to do a 5 straight over both of these obstacles, in which case one is a debris cloud, one is a gas cloud. And you would think, well, I went over the two different obstacles, so, I only suffer the effects of one of them. Well, no matter what they are, you're going to suffer the effects of both of them. So even if these were 2 asteroids, you would suffer a damage for each, and then you would roll a die and suffer a damage for each. And same goes for here. You would roll to see if you suffer damage, assign 1 stress, then you would gain a strain token, roll a die, and see if you become ionized. Now, flying through 2 obstacles means you suffer both effects, but if you're shooting through 2, you still only get 1 defense die to your defense die pool because obstructed is an effect. Here's another interesting example as to where Ahsoka tries to execute a 3 hard, but the Hawk is in the way. So you would think, well, the template ends on top of a rock, so I must suffer those effects. But that is incorrect. It is not where your template ends up, it is where your ship ends up. So if there is no room, which there isn't, the base won't fit, Ahsoka has no room, you then do the train tracks, follow along until you cannot move any longer. So the ending position would be bumping into Hawk rather than overlapping the rock. Here is another great example of something you would not be allowed to do if you've overlapped an obstacle. Ahsoka has done a 3 bank maneuver, ended up range 0 overlapping an obstacle, and you're thinking, well, I am going to have to skip my perform action step, but that's okay. I have afterburners I can boost. Unfortunately, one of the rules of boosting is you may not attempt to boost if the final position would overlap or move through an obstacle. Because remember, this is not technically a maneuver, a boost is a repositioning. So you cannot do the one straight boost and get off of that rock. The afterburners would not go off. You then would be stuck on that rock. So I know what you're thinking. You said, of course I can't afterburners. You told me I have to skip my perform action step. But you really need to pay attention to the wording of some cards. Because when you overlap an obstacle and you are range 0 of it, you skip your perform action step, which is a specific part of your activation. The afterburners allows you to perform a boost after you fully execute a maneuver. That doesn't happen during your action step. So after you fully execute a maneuver, if your executed maneuver was a speed 3 or higher, you can spend a charge to boost. So you'd still be able to, if Ahsoka went a little bit farther and the front of her base was just over the lip of that obstacle and the template that you put down for a boost didn't overlap or go through that obstacle. And the same goes for barrel rolling. So if you execute your maneuver and end up overlapping a rock, you would like to maybe barrel roll this way. But unfortunately, because there is a rock that way, you cannot. You can't overlap the rock again. However, if there is an ability or if you wish to coordinate an ability and you want to barrel roll this way, since this is not overlapping the rock on this side, you are free to reposition. You still, of course, have to suffer the effects of the rock if, there's nothing that cancels it out, but that is another effect. Same thing with tractoring. If something tractors Ahsoka, you are not allowed to barrel roll someone onto a rock, unfortunately. You can barrel roll them in front of a rock so that the next time they execute a maneuver, they go through it, but you cannot barrel roll someone or tractor them onto a rock. And also, I want to note you're going to have cards that either ignore or trigger off of overlapping or flying through certain obstacles and so forth. Like, perfect example would be the Tierfon Belly Run, which allows you to end on a rock at range 0, but still allows you to shoot a weapon and also won't let your opponent modify their dice by re rolling them when they attack you. There's also collision detector, which is a sensor upgrade that you can take that allows you to ignore obstacles when you're boosting or barrel rolling. And then if you spend a charge, you ignore the effects of overlapping those obstacles, which is really powerful because it allows you to execute a maneuver. And then if you overlap an obstacle, you're like, I'm going to spend a charge and ignore everything about this thing and still get to shoot. And then if you want a booster barrel to get out of someone's arc, you can spend the charge and perform a boost and barrel roll onto a rock or asteroid or gas cloud and ignore those effects. So there are cards that are really powerful and will let you ignore those effects. The last thing I'll mention, of course, is the droids or the separatist drones, which they have an ability that lets them sit on top of asteroids and debris. But it specifically says that, so when they overlap a gas cloud, they have to suffer those effects, and they can't use grappling struts to attach onto it because it's gas, it's not a rock or debris, so there's nothing for them to cling to. All right, so that's going to do it for today's video. I mean, I could keep giving you more crazy examples, but I love to hear from you guys. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or comments about any of the rules that you've, had issues with or run into in the past while you're playing, and also some crazy events that have happened or triggered because something like this happened to where you either landed on a rock or somebody got stuck on a rock for the rest of the game because they just didn't see things, or even I've known people who fly through two rocks at once to get away from a ship and ended up being just fine. They suffered some damage, but they were able to get through okay. So I want to say thank you to everyone who requested this video. You will not be ignored when you message me or email me and ask for me to make a video. Please go check out our social media accounts and merchandise over at reconpaintgaming.com. You can check out Recon Tokens, where we make custom tokens for all of your token needs and not just X-Wing. You can buy merchandise like shirts and hats, and then also you can check out our podcast and Facebook channel as well. Go ahead and click like and subscribe to let us know if you're liking the videos, because we love making them and we're going to keep pumping out more. And play casual.